Hello, welcome to Autocar. This is a new Porsche 911 GTS. The big news, of course, is that it's now a hybrid. Not a traditional type of hybrid though, so I'll tell you a little bit more about it before we go for a drive.
Now, when Porsche said it was going to make a hybrid 911, people got a bit worried. A 2-ton plug-in, they said? But no. Porsche's 911 hybrid system, badged T-Hybrid and used on the latest GTS facelift, is as much about going fast as it is about improving economy. So there is a new 3.6 litre version of the flat 6 engine at the rear. This revs to 7,500 RPM and makes 478 brake horsepower on its own. But it's combined with 2 electric motors. The first of these is a drive motor situated inside the 8-speed twin-clutch PDK gearbox. It makes 55 horsepower and can be used to supplement the engine, most notably providing low-speed torque, but it can add power throughout the rev band. The second motor is on the turbocharger itself. Now, the power of this doesn't matter because what it's mainly used for is to spool up the turbo incredibly quickly. So instead of 2 small turbochargers to get quick response, the 911 GTS can get away with having 1 big turbo, knowing there's very little turbo lag because this motor can spin the turbo up to 120,000 RPM and 1.3 bar of pressure in no time at all. The hybrid system doesn't ever run on the electric motor alone. The high voltage battery, which sits at the front, is only 1.9 kilowatt hours. But it does ease the pressure on the engine from doing all the work, and depending on how you're driving, either the turbo motor or the drive motor can be putting power back to the battery or taking it from it. The result is a car with a system total of 534 brake horsepower and 450 foot-pounds of torque, which can go from 0 to 62 miles an hour, that's 100 kilometers an hour, in 3 seconds dead, and on to 194 miles an hour, while returning 26.4 miles to the gallon and 244 grams per kilometre of CO2. Porsche says the system adds 50 kilos to the car's weight, but this is a bit misleading. The headline figure, unladen, is now 1,595 kilos, but the 911 now comes with no back seats as standard. There are no cost option to add back in. If you do add those, this car will broach the 1,600 kilo mark. Anyway, there's an incredible amount of complicated tuning required to meld all of these systems together to make them feel natural to drive. So let's see how that has gone.
So this is a 2-wheel drive GTS. It's got some nice options, including an Alcantara wheel, if that's an option rather than standard. I've dragged the drive mode round into Sport Plus. There's wet, normal, sport, Sport Plus. That puts the dampers in their firm mode and puts the exhaust on as well. It's got active rear steer as standard, as I said, and you can tell when you turn into that corner, it's sort of 4th gear normal corner. If you were on it, it would be 3rd, and you can feel the car turn in and pivot really nicely. I'll tell you what is impressive, and you could tell straight away. One, it's quite loud. It might be too loud. I'll turn down the exhaust. But also just the quickness of the throttle response is really electric. It revs to 7,500 revs anyway. So the way it can work, if I'm on part throttle like this, I'm not using everything, the engine's making plenty of power. There's probably nothing happening with regards to the e-turbo and the drive motor, the electric drive motor. As I come out of the corner like that, I'm fairly high up the rev range. It could well be that there are already a lot of revs in the turbo, that's already blowing. Therefore it doesn't need to assist with electric, it can even brake the turbo down from 120,000 revs a bit and put power back into the battery, or even power the drive motor if it's sort of over boosting effectively. Under braking, as I'm doing now, there is probably electricity from the drive motor going back into the battery at the front. So it's incredibly complicated. The real skill, of course, will be for me not to really know what's going on, other than know that if, say, there's a corner coming up at the moment, and as I come out of that corner, I might leave it a gear higher than I normally would. It's 2nd gear, but let's leave it in 3rd, or maybe 4th. And then even at 2,500 revs there, I get a real kick in the back because the turbo is already spooling high, it's already quick, plus there's a drive motor to fill the torque. That means that the response of this car is just much quicker, much better of engine response. It's also a larger motor than the 3 litre in the Carrera, but it's much bigger, much quicker, much more engine response. It's much louder. It's just a much more impressive drivetrain. If there is a payoff, and I think there probably is, but your mileage may vary. I think there is. A couple of other my colleagues that I've spoken to think there is, some don't. It's that all of this extra tech does come with a weight penalty. Porsche says it's 50 kilos, but of course they have now changed this car so that there are no rear seats as standard. And those rear seats are, say, let's call it 30 kilos. That means actually this stuff adds 80 kilos in total. And you can feel it. And the further you go up the range, so as you add 4-wheel drive, as you go to a Targa, that increases again. So I have driven on the road a Targa with rear seats and 4-wheel drive. It's 1745 kilos before you worry about the rear seats. You can feel that extra weight, you can feel that extra bit of cumbersomeness. That's really nice through there. The 2-wheel drive has got a lovely balance to it. I think less when it comes to this GTS is more. The steering feel is precise. It moves around out of corners. It makes a lot of noise. It goes very fast. I like it a great deal. However, there is also on this job today, not on video, a standard base Carrera which has got its 3 litre motor. Makes a little bit more poke than before, but not loads. It doesn't get on like this. This is really quick, really responsive at all levels. You have to work that a lot more, and it feels like it's less capable. I mean, it is less capable. I tried to keep up with one of these in one, and it was a struggle. And then you swap around cars, and I suddenly went, oh, fine, yes, now I see why I couldn't keep up. This is so much more capable. But I'm not sure it's any more fun. Porsche talked about the GTS being the sweet spot in the range. If it were me, I think a base Carrera does enough for me on the road, and also enough for me really on a track. I think the sweet spot in the range is now the base Carrera. This GTS is lovely, it is great, and if I drove it in isolation, I think I would love it to bits. But I don't know whether it adds another dimension sufficiently, given the extra weight penalty, that it would replace a Carrera in my affections. But it's very good. And the application of it and the integration of it, you wouldn't know. There is no point you would know this is a hybrid car. It just has loads of oomph all the time. It's a great powertrain. I just think it does detract slightly from the ride and handling experience. Thank you for joining. Right, so let's consider the GTS as a road car. I'm in sport mode. Let's knock it back down to normal mode. Drive position's great. It's got these new digital instruments. I've seen some people go, oh, I wish it still had an analog speedo. And when you see the latest Bugatti, which does of course have that extraordinary instrument cluster, I do wonder if a sign of luxury will be analog real dials going forward. But it's very clear, it's very straightforward. The rev counter is still front and center. It's very high resolution. All is good. A mix of buttons and touchscreen all works pretty well. It goes over some crests and things. You can feel the sort of weight as it dips. If I put it through into sport mode, the dampers stay the same, but I can then put the dampers into sport even in this mode should I want to by tapping the PDCC button, and that firms things up a bit, probably a bit too much for the road. I think on UK roads that would be quite a lot too much, quite possibly. But the engine note is ever present. I think this engine doesn't somehow sound quite as natural as the Carrera. No reason why it shouldn't, but I'm just not sure it does. And in the same way that you're on circuit, you would not necessarily know this car has its hybrid powertrain doing stuff. It's just working along in the background, completely calmly, completely unobtrusively. You can put up a screen if you want to, which shows you exactly what's going on, which shows you what power is going where, from which motor to the engine, or from the motor back to the battery, and it'll show you exactly what's going on. But the engineers showed us some stuff earlier and suggested that, look, on a part throttle, you don't necessarily need the turbo spooling, so the little electric motor on the turbo may not be doing anything. The engine may have enough grunt on its own to be getting you along at whatever speed you want, so you don't necessarily need the drive motor in the gearbox to be boosting the engine either. So effectively nothing is happening, and I suspect quite a lot of the time on the road that would be the case. I mean, you don't need all this car's performance on the road. You can't use all this car's performance on the road. I don't know how fast an upcoming turbo is going to be significantly faster than this, as it will have to be. So I just sort of wonder whether a lot of the time you are carrying around 50 plus rear seats worth of kilos, let's call it 80 kilos, for no obvious benefit, except from time to time when you want the extra acceleration, you want the extra noise, you want the extra response. So it kind of depends on your use case, for me, as to how useful all of that stuff is. Yeah, so Porsche talks about the GTS as a sweet spot, but for me, I think the sweet spot is probably still now a Carrera 2, which is fast enough, refined enough, really engaging, really good fun. Just not quite as capable as one of these. But driven in isolation or back to back, this is a compelling, appealing vehicle, which I like very much. So thank you for joining me. We've got videos on this channel most weeks. We're also over at autocar.co.uk, or if you visit us at themagazineshop.com, you can find the entire Autocar archive stretching back to 1895. Thanks very much. I'll see you next time.